Okay, so
Hello,
welcome.
Mr. Sheffer.
Hello, Mr. Turnbull. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Very
Ah,
well.
that's good. Well, we won't tell people we spoke about 10 minutes ago to keep the live
That's the
experience
it's the
feel
magic of
more real.
television.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to break the third wall, or is it the fourth wall? Anyway,
Of
so
course.
today we're going to be talking about objections, which is something that I have spoken about for goodness gracious me, 40 years. And it's always a lot of things salespeople want to talk about objections. So, and we had different objections on the website, how to handle this, how to handle that. But Tom, you were talking before about we need to take a step back, don't we?
Well, I think before we dive in and say, well, let's talk about how you deal with the price objection or this, that, or the other, it's like I think it's just kind of setting the scene a little bit by maybe what we mean by an objection, and maybe just conceptually, is there a kind of standard kind of philosophy in terms of is there a conventional wisdom of like, well, what is the best way to deal with an objection? you know what would be the kind of guiding philosophy behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think when you get objections, and what is an objection? I mean, because sometimes is a question an objection. I would say loosely, maybe more definedly, an objection is anything that stops you getting to the next stage of the sale or ultimately the sale itself. So sometimes a question could be an objection. Sometimes, um, and then you've got to look at when am I getting these objections? So if you're getting your objections very early on, before you've had an appointment, during the early stage of the pitch, at the late stage, and I think we should address this. What happens when you get objections after the pitch by email and your inability to get them back on the phone? So there's different ways to handle it. I would look at things. I try not to look at the sale as one big, massive production. What I think is look at it in more steps. So, what is your objective? Always look at what your objective before you're getting them on the phone. Your objective is to get them on the phone or get them into a talk. So, any objection has to be met with the strategy that I need to get them on the phone. When it comes to the end, we should be talking about value for money. Is this the right price? So that needs to be. If you haven't ticked off the boxes along the way, then there's a problem.
Would you say that meeting objections is like an essential part of the sales process, and it shouldn't be necessarily your strategy to avoid objections, but quite the opposite, that you actually need to embrace objections because it has to be part of the process that you're going to meet them at some point? Or would it say no, the perfect sale is where you never get an objection and just get a yes without any?
That's a good point. I'm thinking that I'm more in the camp of trying to address potential objections before they come up. So I don't really want objections actually, but what I want to do is if I'm let me put it another way. Let's say in my sale I'm getting a lot of objections about the same thing. Let's say that's the case. Then I will address that immediately. Let's say I don't know. Let's start trying to bring an example. Let's say every person I call says, "How much is it?" right off the bat. Now, that doesn't sound like an objection, of course. It could even be a buying signal, but most salespeople don't like that question right off the bat.
Going back to your point of where in the pitch these things are,
Yeah,
I think if you get it before you even had a chance to discuss it, then it's an objection. If you get it later, where you've kind of
yeah,
then maybe it's more of a buying signal.
yeah, that's true. So, you might want to address that right off the bat. Look, I know that most people I speak to want a kind of idea of how much things are. So before we get into it, I thought I'd address that now, and I might give a range. And so, but when we get down to it at the end, let's talk about what's specifically good for you.
But that would be a strategy that you would adopt based on experience as opposed to being your go-to strategy potentially.
Potentially, yes. In that example, um, you could do it because you're getting this objection right off the bat. It could be a strategy you want to employ straight off the bat as well. So I'd say to any salesperson, the wonderful thing about sales is that you get a chance to have a redo. So with so many different countries, you think of it like football in some ways. You've got lots of games you can play for. Don't just look at the next game. Look at a strategy that's going to win you the game over the long term. You've got 20 years of this, so you've got a long time to address it. And bear in mind, whatever strategy you put in place, as long as you do it well, it's going to be a percentage better, but it's not going to radically change your whole life. So, if you say I'm going to mention price at the beginning, not yet, it might be better. I tend to mention price right off the bat because I found that it's more likely to lead to a deal. But that's in what I'm selling.
So if we focus in on pricing, because we the first bullet point that we've got on this is addressing pricing objections effectively.
Mm.
Would you then advocate that addressing price early on, regardless of whether the prospect brings it up or not, is the best strategy, is a good strategy to go with?
I would say by and large, depending on what you're selling, I mean, if you're selling systems that are 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, you probably don't need to mention it because the people you're talking, they'll probably have a strong understanding. But by and large, I think it's best to be upfront with the pricing straight off the bat. I mean, people aren't stupid. They know it's going to cost something. I mean, if you're going into a sale, I suppose, remember when we used to do things and we would go into sell, and then there'll be times, especially if you're selling, and sometimes if you're selling advertising or something like conceptual, and you're reaching out to someone who produces content, then some people didn't even think they had to pay for it. So anyone that sells content might probably have found themselves in that situation. Oh, I didn't realize. I thought you were just reaching out because I'm an expert. So we struggled with that for years, and then we started. Some people in our company put the proposal in right from the off. They said, "This is an idea, but let's get on the phone." The key thing is once you're on the phone call, I very rarely would think of a case where someone said, "Oh, I didn't realize there was money involved." But if they're not realizing there's money involved, and you get to the end, how much better off you're going to be? You might as well be upfront. The whole point at the beginning of the sale is that people trust you, they like you, and by coming up and being very upfront with that, I can't see a massive downside.
Because obviously conventional wisdom within sales is you don't want to get too specific around pricing until you've had the opportunity to explore and develop the value of the product. Because
Yes.
without developing the value of the product, giving them a price, it's meaningless, and it feels like well, that's not going to work to my favor. But it's like, well, how do you talk about pricing then before you've had a chance to talk about the value without diminishing the value? Because that's kind of what our first question is really asking.
I wouldn't give any specifics at the beginning. I think that's absolutely right. I think you have to sell the concept. And we can go into this later with pricing as well. So at the beginning, you're really just saying, this is the range. You can do things for hundreds of thousands. You can do things for low thousands, but it really depends on the value that you see this, whether you feel it's going to help you. At the end of it, we can get very specific about it. So if someone actually does say, how much is it? You can
Yeah.
always well, we always said there were four ways to answer an objection. You can answer it, you can ignore it, and you can sidestep it, or you can laugh it off. And these are kind of four ways to address it. But if someone said, how much is it? Right off the bat, you probably would say, this is not a good situation. They're so focused on the money that you're not going to get $100,000 deal. I've never got $200,000 deal where someone says, how much is it? That's never
Yeah.
happened. So right at the beginning, you want to say, well, it's a great question. Let me just try to find out what you want. But may I ask you a question, is always my inroad. That's your question. Yeah. Are you asking that question because you're concerned about how much it is from a purely cash flow or budget perspective, or are you looking for value? And they would say, well, they'll give you an answer. They might say a bit of both. They might say, well, it's more about the money. And I said, well, look, don't worry, it's not going to be millions of pounds, but we do things from this to this. What, without getting too granular, I don't even know if this is right for you yet. Do those
Yeah.
work if it does prove to be a good investment?
Yeah, because I guess they might be asking because if it is £1 million, then it's just a waste of time speaking
Yes.
to them because they're never going to be in the market to spend that much
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. So I would
So
say conceptually, the way I try to handle objections are step one, I will try to understand why they're objecting. So it's good. Look, are you asking that question because it feels like you might think this is out of your price range, your investment level, so you don't want to waste time, or is there another reason? And if they say, yeah, that's right, then we can go into it.
because is it fair to say that one of the things that buyers find most annoying about salespeople is when they feel like they're being evasive and
Yeah.
slippery and trying to, dodge away from. So you have to be careful when doing this. Like you don't want to answer them directly because that's not really the right way to go, but you don't want to appear to be evasive or slippery in your response as well. That's a bit of a
Yeah.
tightrope, no?
Yeah, because remember when people used to ring up and they say, oh, I'm not selling anything. Or are you selling something? No, 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 I'm not selling
Yeah.
anything. And you think, well, you are, aren't you? I
Yeah,
used to
well,
get
that's
people.
it.
I used to get people say that to me. Are you selling something? No, I just thought I'd try to find another friend. What are you doing tonight? I mean, it's like, obviously I'm trying to sell something. Um, so sometimes being really direct and say, look, I get why you're. I think I get why you're asking this, Tom. May I ask you a quick question? Yeah. Are you asking to see whether this is affordable, or is there another reason? No, you go. Well, yeah. Okay. Look, I know your investment levels. Or obviously, it's a concern to you. You want to make sure you get a good bang for your buck. So we do. I sometimes said this. Look, I'll tell you some ranges because it's difficult for me to say a specific. What I can say is, in the history that I've pitched, I've never ever had anyone said no to me on price. I've had plenty of people say no to me because they didn't see the value, but no one's ever said I can't afford it because
Yeah.
we do things in the thousands, 10,000. But think of it more like an investment. What's going to be right for you? And then I sometimes throw a question back, which is going to take them away, which is like, look, Tom, if at any stage through this that you feel that this isn't a value, would you be able to say no to me?
Um, yeah, I could say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
So
there's only one
yeah,
answer they can give.
exactly. So look, so during this, don't please feel comfortable. This isn't for you. Let's not waste time. If it's not for you, we'll end the conversation because we're obviously all busy. Is that
Yeah.
is that okay with you? The other thing about handling objections as well is there's a brilliant. If you haven't read it, get Chris Voss's book on Never Split the Difference, the FBI negotiator. I'd say it's one of the best books on negotiation. I suppose you could say objection handling, negotiation. It must be in the same ballpark. So he's brilliant. What he says is take the objection, understand it, and then do what he calls an emotional audit. So all of these are kind of setting the scene. Sales is generally set up and close. So it's almost like tell them if it's an emotional objection, then tell them agree how they feel. So that's what he calls an emotional audit. And he uses this phrase at the beginning. It seems like. So it seems like the reason he says it seems like is because you're depersonalizing everything. So it seems like, or it feels like, price is an important factor for you. And then you'd go further and say, so would it be fair to say that it feels like you're weighing up, is this going to be a good investment, which is going to give you a return? or is it going to be a poor investment where you would have a complete, ridiculously waste of money? Am I? Is that fair to say you're in one of these two camps? And of
And I
course, the
think that's a
customer.
very clever way to respond. And I noticed when you were doing that, you were deliberately really slowing yourself down as much as possible to kind of pull them in at the same
Yes,
time.
yeah. I think one of the things is when we speak and when we think, there are two different speeds. So you're speaking at one speed, you're thinking a lot quicker. And
Because if I probably hark back to my early days of sales and I phoned someone up and they said to me, "Well, how much is it?" I can see a version of myself being like, well, it depends, and I'd probably speed up because I'd start panicking because I'd be like, "Oh no, I don't want to talk about that. You know, I need to try
yeah,
and get them off it." And there would be and you probably the less experienced salesperson might speed up and start to get a bit panicky at that point. So you have to really force yourself to slow it down at that
yeah, it's not just, I'll try to do it now, it's not just
point.
slowing down, it's pausing between words. It's really being deliberate. So generally, by and large, if you're using monosyllabic words, you're going to create more emotion. Um, there's how much is it? It's very simple language. They're not saying, am I going to be, uh, is this going to put me in an impecunious position from which I may
You were
be.
struggling to find a big word
I
there.
was trying to find a big word. I went with impecunious, but a position that would affect my, you know, cash flow. It just sounds different. One's more academic, and you want to slow it down, pause a lot, as if you could call it business therapy, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do, if we're talking conception, just to summarize that, is acknowledge. Don't I tend to, if I had the four, sidestep it, ignore it, laugh at it, answer it. I tend to hit objections head on. There's something that Chris Voss talks about as well, and I've read this in numerous books. There's a part of the brain, they call it the lizard brain or the reptile brain or the amygdala, if you want to get technical. And this part of the brain is where you feel fear, anxiety. It's a kind of flight or fight response mechanism. And typically, unless that part of the brain is satisfied, then you can't move to the other part of the brain, which is the logical side. So we're at conflict with each other. So by contrary to sort of popular belief, or addressing a problem, how someone feels, it seems that you're not 100% convinced. Is that a ridiculous thing to say?
So it's
Is
so
is
it's
is,
all
is going to help you, not hinder
so
you.
it's almost like you're not when you get the objection, you're not seeking to just take that objection at face value. You're looking to dig into the reason why that question is being asked and
Yeah,
kind of show empathy for the buyer as to why they're asking that question, as opposed to just dealing with the question at face value. And if you can
absolutely.
demonstrate that empathy as to why they've asked it and say that you understand why they've asked it and you acknowledge that it's a really important question to address, that's almost enough to give you the right to move on. Because
Yeah,
it's like you and obviously acknowledge that that question will be addressed. It's not, you're not ignoring it. You're acknowledging its importance and why they've asked it, and you understand, and it's a great point. But let's continue with the conversation and get back to it. So that's kind of the concept.
yeah. I think in the old days they used to call this feel, felt, found, didn't they? I understand how you
I'm
feel.
probably too young to know.
Miles too young, Tom. Miles too young. That Botox is working. So, um, I understand how you feel. We've also felt this. A lot of customers have found that. I find that type of approach a little bit more patronizing and less genuine. It might be true, but it's not about what's true. It's about how you come across. I'd rather be more. You mentioned something before. We're in a different world now. Customers have a lot more information. They've been sold to probably more often today than they've ever been back in my day. So genuine authenticity is so important. And if I look you in the face almost to say, look, it seems that you're feeling this way, and if that's the case, one of my favorite phrases is, if that's the case, don't do it. you
Yeah.
know there is a psychology to this as well. And I'll just point this out. In some ways, when you say don't do it, the brain is not processing don't do it. The brain is processing do it, because you may remember we did an exercise once where, and maybe anyone listening to this will try to not think about this. I'm telling you, please do not think about what I'm going to say. Don't think of a white polar bear. Don't think of a white polar bear juggling red balls. Don't think of it. Now, if you're like most people, you would have an image of a white polar bear. So when you say, if it's not for you, pause, don't do it. And I did emphasize the do a bit there. Then the process for the customer is they saying, well, the words are, he's telling me not to do it. What an honest person. But the reality is, psychologically, you're embedding a command to do it.
So we are talking about some tactics and techniques here to
Yeah.
kind of exert influence, but what you're also saying is that it needs to have a foundation of authenticity.
Yeah.
You
100%.
need to be coming at it, because the reality is I don't want to get into a conversation at the beginning of a pitch about price, because it's not a valuable thing, and I don't think it's good for either of us. And I genuinely believe that, and I need to be able to communicate that articulately and effectively to the person I'm speaking to, in order that we can have a more constructive conversation about it.
So if
And
someone said to
that's
you, how much is it at the beginning, and you were to come up with your authentic self there and repeat that back, how would you handle that?
well, I think it would be exactly as you've described, really. It would be to, first of all, understand better why they're asking that question.
Mm.
Because I think it's important to know why you're asking that question. Because, like, I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want them to waste their time. And if there is a product, if the value of my product or the cost of my product is out of their price range just for pure budgetary reasons, we probably shouldn't nip it in the bud right there. Well, I don't
I,
want to talk to them for half an hour
yeah,
if they can never afford what I'm selling.
I like that. I think that would be a great answer. I think the way you did that was excellent. I think that would be superb. If someone said that to me, I love the fact you said I don't want to waste my time, because I can't stand it when salespeople, oh well, I don't want to waste your time. Really, come on. Who's the most important person in this call? I mean, you are.
Yeah.
So, and they're the most important for them. But you've got to be real. Look, I don't want to waste my time. If you're not convinced and you don't want to do it, there'd be little point in that. And I'm sure
I
you don't want to
remember
waste your time. It's just a more genuine way of saying, come on, you don't want to wait. It's more strong.
I remember the first sales job I ever got. I watched a sales training video, which was a 1980s American sales coach
Oh,
wearing
getting better.
like in
That's brilliant.
full Gordon Gecko gear.
Yeah,
And one of the
superb.
things, there was a point where he was on the stage and he was like marching around, and he turned around to all the sales guys in the audience and said, "Get off your knees, mothers!" Like,
Oh,
like
wow.
he was like that, and he was basically trying to say, "Look, you're important too. Get off your knees." And it was like,
Yeah,
it was
it's
obviously awful the way it was set up, but it was like the concept of,
well, I suppose
salespeople need to understand that their time's important too.
in some ways, as a salesperson, and I think when I look back to myself, 40 years ago, you know, how confident was I? I don't think I was very confident salesperson when I started. It was all trying to, get past it, get to the end of the script, just trying to get to the end without any degree of confidence. Because you do get a lot of rejection as a salesperson. You're probably being rejected more often than you're succeeding. You're failing more than and that's not going to be good for someone who hasn't got a great deal of confidence. And people always imagine this, you know, Glenn Ross, that guy, coming along as the slick thing. But reality is, confidence is important. Don't get me wrong, but it's more of a genuine.
Yeah, and
You come across genuine.
some of the best salespeople I've ever worked with have not necessarily been the most confident and cocky or arrogant of people, but they've
No,
built confidence in their professional life through having an incredibly strong process. you know, and having a process that they developed, worked on, and built success through, and through that process, that they built their confidence because they
Yeah,
had something that they could just turn to and rely on that they knew wouldn't work every time, but if they applied themselves to it and worked hard, it would work because they've got the experience and track
yeah.
record to do it.
But
And there's
look,
countless
getting
salespeople I could name that have
oh,
been like that.
absolutely. So yeah, so don't worry if you're a person that's not, feels like, oh, I'm not. How can I be a salesperson if I've not got that? But looking at the objections, one of the things we were talking about is to think about objection, price at the end objection. Um,
So we've kind of talked about a lot. I feel like what we've talked about a lot is like early objections and how to deal
yeah,
with them. But yeah, what about uh, the objections that come at the end?
right. Well, we might have to do a part two on this because we've got 5 minutes to go. But I'm going to set this up, hopefully, that we may do next week. Um, a bonus episode for what price at the end. I think like I think of it more like at the beginning it's quite wide and you don't know which way you're going, but as you get towards the end of the sale you're filtering down, so there should be less options really. um you're making customers make decisions on things, and from the Latin decision, to cut away rather than incision, you're removing things rather than adding things. So if it's priced towards the end, you've got to really understand, is everything else you know um agreed upon? So if it's, we used to have that objection, think about it, face to face. I think the most common objection we get now is, I want to go and talk to someone else. That's the biggest one we get. I don't know what it is in other people's professions, but that's the one we get. When I was starting, it used to be, I want to think about it. And then what happened was, most people would then say, um, you know, what do you want to think about? And that really never worked.
Well,
Um,
you're the managing director of our business, and you can make a final decision. But I've heard you as a buyer tell the salespeople that you're speaking to that you need to go and discuss it with the team.
oh, absolutely. No one said I was completely honest. Um,
But it's a negotiation tactic that our
yes,
buyers use against us to buy
yeah,
themselves time. And
true.
and they're experienced buyers that we're going to be speaking to.
Yeah, I think you've got to make things, everything is a setup, and you've got to make things easy for yourself. I mean, typically, you mentioned something early on to say, are you embracing objections? Are you trying to set up objections? All of these things can work. But really, and we didn't even tackle this one, well, how do you handle emails afterwards? The real reason is you're rescuing at this stage. You know, really, how did you get into this stage in the first place? You're better off looking at your process and thinking, why am I in this stage? Because if you're closing, when we say always be closing, it's really getting commitment through the sale, getting what they call explicit needs through the sale. So at the end of it, it's simply a case of just taking them over the line. But in pricing objection, we go back to, what's the concept again? Are you nervous because it's the money, or are you nervous it's not value? But what do those mean, and what does value mean? Really, it's all about the consequence of doing this. What is your upside? What is your downside? Because that's really about value, isn't it? It's about assessing risk. So really, you've got to get into the weeds a bit and say to them, look, well, let's go through it. What is your upside? What is your downside? What are you worried about? What is your concern if it didn't work? I get right back to that emotional audit,
Well,
back to the upside.
conceptually, it feels like we're saying the same thing. So if you're dealing with a price objection at the end of a pitch and they're bringing up price as a thing, the concept is the same. You need to understand, well, why? Why are
Yeah,
we talking about the price here? Is it because throughout this conversation and how I've articulated it, you don't see the right value? Like, so let's explore that. Let's talk about where you don't see value or where the
yeah.
issues lie.
I,
So it's the
I get,
same thing you're doing, really.
it's the same thing. One of the things that I've found with advertising at the beginning, before they've done it, I harp onto this trust. So you've got to set it up that very shortly, and I think we might have to bring this into the next episode, is to say that we don't know. There's an unknown, which ultimately, would it be fair to say that you don't trust 100%? And I was putting things like 100% that this is going to work for you. So, okay, so what should we do? So in other words, and then you can throw in a question after the audit. So for you, then it could be a great investment. It could be a poor investment. Let's say we go through this process. So how can we put something in place in order to earn your trust? Or I used to have a business partner, Ari, that used to look them in the eye and very innocently and soften his voice and go, would you allow me to earn your trust? And it was so sweet that they always went, well, what do you have in mind? So asking a question like, would you allow me, soften your voice, just would you put on, I think Chris Voss calls it the DJ voice, but would you allow me to earn your trust? Just soften it like a child almost, and very softly. Because, and then most people, at least if they have some degree of empathy, will go, okay, yeah, well, what did you have in mind? And then it's softly, and getting that, because you feel like the parable of the wind and the sun, isn't it? You put more wind on, you force it, someone's going to hold on to their jacket, or you can be sunny and the person will take it off because they want to. And it will be like, yeah, because logically, how do you test it? I just remember as a last point, when I was selling franking machines, and then I'd have a customer at the end, and I'd mention the price, and I'd say, let's call it 1,500 quid or whatever. And the customer would say, I want to check out your competition. Not many people would actually say that, which was quite upfront about it. I want to see if I'm going to get the best deal out there. But because it was a low amount, I understood it. I understand you want the best deal. We went through this whole process because you want to make sure you're making the best decision. All these things that came along. I said, look, how long do you need to check out the competition? And then we went through that, and he said, well, I'm going to need a few hours. It's going to down. So I'd say, and a day of your time, let's is worth what? And he said, look, how about, and then I came up with a question, how about I came up with something that benefits both you and me? Now that's an open question conceptually, without any detail, that he went, what do you have in mind? Now I know the door's open. So now it became of, look, I don't want to come back. I don't want to wait. I'm here. Our machines are the best. We control 80% of the market, or whatever it might be. You really don't want to be looking and wasting your time only to come back to this one. If I can come back with a discount on this in order to save you time, I win, you win. Can we shake hands on that one? And look, ultimately, it's a business decision. Is this going to be good for your business? So it's not a personal thing. And then he, in this case, said, absolutely. What do you have in mind? We came to a decision. But I've got deals in the craziest of ways. I've got deals by saying, are you a gambler? And they said, go on. What do you have in mind? I said, all right, take out a coin. We'll toss a coin. If you come up with heads, we'll do it for this. If it's tails, we'll do it for Y. Would you be prepared to do that? And I tell you, it's not the money. That's the crazy. That's what I'm trying to highlight. It's not the money. It's the sport quite often. And he went, absolutely. And I can't remember who won, honestly, but we got the deal. And I took a little hit, maybe. I think I did. I don't know. But it was just, and what I'm probably trying to say to end this is, you've got to be having fun. You've got to be enjoying it. You've got to love it, and that's makes sales
Yeah.
so wonderful.
Yeah. So it's like embrace objections. They're going to come. You need to be
Yeah.
ready for them. And you need to be prepared to meet them head on. When you do, you need to be authentic. You need to be genuine in the way in which you respond to them. Um, there's probably some technique that people need to learn in terms
Yes.
of slowing down, being calm, including pauses. But I think that those concepts around authenticity, directness, um, and kind of going into it in the right spirit is as important as anything else when dealing with these objections. Not seeing the buyer as your enemy, but as someone that you're looking to collaborate with.
That's a very good message to end on. I think so. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. Well, look, thank you very much for anyone that watched. And we will see you next week. Have a great one.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much.
Bye.
Cheers, Mr. Shepard. Bye.
And you, Mr. Tuggle.